Biggest news of the week. Let's get into it. Palantir is now eligible theoretically to be included in the S&P 500 index fund if they can maintain GAAP profitability for the next 4 quarters, because some committee said that founder-led companies with majority F-class shares are now eligible, which they didn't used to be before.
Just to put one thing into perspective, this used to be allowed, by the way. That's how Google was allowed to get into the indexes as well back in the day. And then they made a rule after the fact. So before, same thing with Meta. Meta was also founder led. So you had a situation where Zuckerberg still has majority ownership over the company's decision making, not the company itself in terms of shares, but the decision making.
Why do you think that they changed that, Chris? I mean, because Google, I thought, was always a really well-run organization, and that's interesting that they would make that a rule. I mean, I thought that the other rules that they have, the profitability, all that.
The main reason why is because you're basically going against shareholder value, right? So basically, because you're a shareholder, you get to have a percent of say in how the company is run. So traditionally, your shareholders are the ones that are supposed to be making decisions. Now, the way they make decisions is not they vote on specific issues, but they vote on the board of directors and different elections so that those people representing them can make those decisions. So it's kind of like how the government works, right? Where you get a vote based on, I mean, technically you get a vote because you have one vote, but in shareholder terms, the more ownership you have, the more say you get to have in the company's operating. So with F-class shares, that whole thing goes out the window, because right now, if you look at Palantir, Peter Thiel, Alex Karp, and Stephen Cohen ultimately can make any decision they want, regardless of how shareholders vote. So right now, if let's say they only own 2% of the company and 98% of the company said, look, we want to remove Alex Karp as the CEO, you couldn't do it because those supermajority shares would just outclass the rest of the body. So that's one of those things that's like, is that really a fair thing for shareholders? Do shareholders, it's not so important for like retail shareholders, I suppose, because we're such at the bottom level and we don't really get to make decisions on companies. But when it comes to like activists, like people that get on board and they want to make sure that the company is doing fairly well, they can rearrange things. So here's an example of something that was positive. And this one that of, Cheniere Energy. Cheniere was originally founded by Sharif Suki, who was an executive. He built up LNG Cheniere, to a degree, but he was also taking on a lot of what does that thing called? He was getting paid a lot, and he wasn't really running the company very efficiently. Now Carl Icahn comes in, bought up a lot of shares, and launched an activist campaign against him, and got him booted off as CEO, and put, I think, Jack Fusco on, who literally took it to like another level. So it can have positive effects, because after that, Cheniere really did well, but it can also have detrimental of things too. Like here's an example of like Steve Jobs, right? Steve Jobs got voted out of Apple, right?
For a Pepsi director, right?
Well, he used to be, from Pepsi, but I mean, this is the thing.
What do you think about this news? Do you think this is good for Palantir? This potential, like, obviously, if we can maintain GAAP profitability, this is great, right?
Well, I mean, it's gonna force Palantir to stay GAAP profitable.
So isn't this a really good thing?
I would say in the short term, it's definitely a good thing, because they've already got 1 quarter under the belt, and they probably want more quarters of GAAP profitability under their belt. So maybe they'll go a little bit lighter on OpEx. They'll cut back on some of their spending to keep GAAP profitability higher. If they had some initiatives around growing their business, they might slow it down a little bit, just to make sure that this is something that they can utilize to get listed and then include in all the indexes. So, and for shareholders, it's definitely a positive sign. I don't know.
Steve, what are your thoughts? Let me get Steve, then you, Matt. I need Steve to make sure he's awake this whole time. Go ahead, Steve.
When I put it on mute, it means I got the Sopranos on.
You're such a bitch.
But Chris is right. You look at what the Godfather of LNG did, but I don't know. We guys see a string of quarters with profitable GAAP net income, it'll be good if they're included. Like, there's nothing negative about it because it's going to force index funds and managers to purchase shares, drive volume up, but who knows what the impact will be. I mean, I didn't really study from when Tesla got included to not. What effect did it have on Tesla?
Tesla went up 40% when it got included.
When it got included, over how long?
Over the course of like 2 months, something like that.
Yeah, it was a lot really quickly.
You wouldn't know,
I don't
Steven,
see it
because you
being a
didn't own
bad thing.
Tesla.
I just,
So
I don't know. I'll be excited when they actually get added because who knows what they're going to do this quarter. I mean, Carp kind of fraudulently slipped during the interview in CNBC. So,
but here's my thing, like, why would they issue this letter if they weren't gap profitable? I cannot logically, it would be the biggest FU to shareholders to make a shareholder letter that we are now legible and then not follow up on the biggest requirement. Like, why wouldn't you just not put out that letter, right? So I think we're going to be gap profitable this quarter.
No, I think they're going to do everything in their power to live up to that. But like I said, the business conditions may not support that kind of move. It's, there's things that the CEOs are going to say to get you on board, to, give you that like, oh my God, I'm investing in a really good company. But, if the macroeconomic conditions don't match or line up, then no matter how good of a CEO you are, you're not going to be able to do it. So as an example, look at Tesla. They projected a 20% gross margin, but who could have guessed that, all the stuff that happened with price of lithium going sky high and all this other shit that was going on at the same time, that would have negatively impacted them. CEOs are going to give you sunshine and rainbows because they're not going to like come out and say, guys, I'm sorry, even though we're eligible to be listed on S&P 500 because of rule changes, we still have a tough quarter to go and we may not make it, blah, blah. No one likes that. No one does that as CEO. Everyone's going to, project out sunshine and rainbows. That's just what a CEO does. They want to maintain their stock price, if not try to boost it a little higher, So think logically from, yeah.
What was that?
I said, your thoughts on the S&P stuff?
So I guess I'm going to look at it and provide two perspectives, right? If you're somebody that really just wants to get your cost basis back, because a lot of people are underwater, this is a great thing. And I think that they should look forward to it if they think that within the next 2 years, Palantir is going to be included in the S&P 500. They could 2x their money, 3x their money. I'm not looking for a 2 or 3x, right? I mean, I've formulated this part of my portfolio sufficiently enough where, look, it'll sting if it goes to 0. I don't think it will. But in 10 years' time, I want it to be something that's 10x, right? Something that's truly meaningful and a good position within the portfolio. So to me, having an S&P 500 entry in 2024 versus 2025 doesn't matter to me because in 10 years, I'm thinking we're going to be in the same place. The thing that bothers me and kind of irked me a little bit, because Chris is more of like a trader to an extent, right? You have to think of where his mind's at compared to where my mind is at. Chris, no offense to you, Chris, because you're right in your own realm, right? Like this is how you structure your portfolio. It's personal finance, right? But my thing is with it is I would rather them not take a shortcut on trimming back OPEX. I would rather them take their time, do what they think is right. They have the cash on hand to do it. They can have that opportunity to not necessarily force profitability if they think going after this client is a better opportunity than going after that client or building this piece of software versus that piece of software. All that stuff, reinvestment back in the organization and creating these programs is OPEX, right? That's things that you have to spend money on and more employees that you have to spend money on to free up other employees' time to be able to figure out, okay, we need this department and the headcount associated with that to be able to go on with whatever is going to be the next big thing, that comes after Apollo or comes after AIP. And that all takes money and time. I don't think that they should shortchange and be like, well, we really need to trim back on the OPEX a little bit to get into the S&P 500 when I'm looking 10 years down the road and they've been looking at this for over the past 20 years and cut corners like 1 or 2 years ahead of time just because they want to get, a little bit of money from BlackRock and Vanguard. And going back a little bit to the piece about institutional ownership, that bothers me a little bit as well. I think in times like this, where a company is still trying to get to where their optimal progression is, you need the founders to be able to maintain control because they have a vision, right? It's one thing if they're sinking the ship, right? Palantir is not a sinking ship. And same thing with Apple back in the late 80s when they gave up Steve Jobs. it was maybe going through some dire straits, but it wasn't a sinking ship. Maybe I'm biased because, I know where Apple is today, and maybe it really was in a really dire time that I don't have that, insight into. And obviously maybe they made a better choice, and Steve came back with a vengeance and obviously took it to where he did until he resigned in 2008 or retired, whatever you want to call it. Because he didn't resign, I guess, rather he stepped back. He gracefully left because of everything with his health and everything they like. But you need the founders to an extent to take those things. And sometimes with these activists is they're more looking at it like Chris is, right? And not saying that Chris is wrong, but they're looking for, we need to get profitable as soon as possible so the share price can pop and we can get our 30% for the year and get the fuck out. It's like, that's not what I care about, right? So it's all about different strokes for different folks, right? So some people are going to think that I'm an idiot by talking the way I'm talking about how I'm not extremely excited about the S&P 500. I am excited about it. I knew it was inevitable. I honestly think that, well, I shouldn't say I know it was inevitable. I had a high likelihood thought that it was going to be extremely likely with where I thought Palantir was going and what I got myself involved in 2017, 2018. But what I hope it doesn't do is go down the same rabbit hole all other public companies go down, which is do everything for the sake of the shareholders. A lot of times the shareholders, you have to try to appease the people that are looking quarter to quarter, people are looking 10 years down the road. You can't appease everybody. And so my hope is like they do what they've been doing for the past 20 years and building this great company and don't just try to shift up and shift the company culture towards we have to make the quarterly numbers. It's like, that's not who Palantir is. Palantir is, hey, we make great software for the modern enterprise, so we have a vision as to what we can be. And that is what it is. You don't think Satya Nadella sits around and says, we need to make our quarterly numbers. No, Satya Nadella is like, no, this is where we need to head the company towards. We need to make a great enterprise suite of customers and get 365 off the ground and stuff like that. It's like, they don't really, I hope they're not worrying about the quarter to quarter. Jeff Bezos didn't worry about the quarter to quarter. So I hope that Palantir doesn't do the same. I hope they do the same and make sure that they don't go that quarter to quarter route and they still think about 5-10 years down the road with every decision that they make.